Great. Good afternoon and welcome to the pre-application webinar for the National Service Line for Incarcerated Survivors of Sexual Abuse Initiative. My name is Brittany Bruner and I am Contract Support for the Bureau of Justice Assistance's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. I will be kicking off today's meeting. If you would like to view closed captioning for the webinar, we will share a link in the chat box where you can view that. This webinar is being recorded, so please remember to keep your lines muted to minimize background noise. The webinar recording and slides will be made available after the presentation. Webinar presenters will be answering questions throughout the presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box on the bottom right side of your screen rather than the chat box. The Q&A box allows our presenters to see if a question has been answered. I would now like to turn it over to Marnie Shields with the Office on Violence Against Women to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Brittany. So I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to our solicitation, and then I will turn it over to Tom Talbot, who is the Director of the Pre-Management Office at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, who's going to tell you a little more. But in a nutshell, we've heard from the field, and when I say the field, I mean both correctional facilities and victim service providers and state coalitions, about challenges with two different PREA standards, one of which is around getting services to victims of sexual abuse, and the other is around having an outside entity for reporting sexual abuse in detention. And we're very excited to partner with BJA on this initiative. And what we're hoping to learn from the end product is whether and how a service line could help with either or both of those standards and meeting those needs of victims. And so that's what we're going to be looking for, which Lucy's going to talk more about in the application, is talking about your plan of how you're going to gather the information to create this end product. And then in the end, what we're looking for is information to inform, as I said, would a service line potentially address these needs and what would that service line look like? So we really thank you for attending this webinar. We hope that it will provide you with a good understanding of what to do if you do want to apply and answer your questions about the solicitation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Great. Thank you so much, Marnie, and hi. I just want to make sure, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to be sure. And Brittany, just quickly, we really appreciate all of your and BJA's National Training and Technical Assistance Center's support in putting on this, this webinar today. So thank you so much, Brittany. As Marnie mentioned, my name is Tom Talbot, and I work in the Pre-Management Office at the Bureau of Justice Assistance within the Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Justice. And I, too, would like to add a very warm and sincere welcome to all of you across the country who are taking time out of your very busy schedules to participate in this webinar. We really appreciate it. The Acting Director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, Kristen Mahoney, and the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of DOJ's Office of Justice Programs, Amy Solomon, are very supportive of this unique and important initiative that's focusing on a national service line for incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse. Both Amy and Kristen send you all their regards and thank you for your interest in this initiative. So that you better understand how the Department of Justice organizations that are involved in this initiative are related and organized, BJA, where the Pre-Management Office resides, is one of several programmatic components of DOJ's Office of Justice Programs. The Office on Violence Against Women, however, is not a component of the Office of Justice Programs. OVW is a separate DOJ entity that does not reside within the Office of Justice Programs. The partnership between two separate DOJ entities, that is BJA and OVW, is one of several reasons why I believe this partnership is so important and exciting. But before we go any further, I want to recognize and acknowledge While progress is thankfully being made, we are all continuing to deal with the great many challenges, hardships, and tragedies related to an unprecedented once in 100 years global pandemic. The pandemic has impacted all of us, both professionally and personally, and on behalf of everyone at the Department of Justice, I sincerely hope you, your family members, and your loved ones are safe and well. I mentioned a moment ago how excited I am about the partnership between OVW and BJA to carry out this National Service Line initiative. In my view, the partnership is so exciting because it integrates the expertise and experience within BJA's PREA Management Office related to the successful implementation of the National PREA standards with the expertise and experience at OVW addressing the needs of victims of sexual abuse and in establishing support lines for victims. The overarching purpose of the PREA standards is to prevent, detect, and respond to the sexual abuse of individuals who are incarcerated. The standards contain more than 300 specific requirements related to this larger purpose, and this OVW-BJA collaborative initiative, as Marnie mentioned, focuses on two specific standards. They are Standard 115.51 and Standard 115.53. And the goal of this initiative is to explore how a national service line for incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse can assist correctional agencies and facilities to address the needs of these survivors more effectively, and in so doing, achieve and maintain compliance with PREA Standard 115.51 and or PREA Standard 115.53. Briefly, PREA Standard 115.51 requires every correctional agency to provide at least one way for those who are incarcerated to report sexual abuse to a public or private entity or an office that is not part of the agency. This entity or office must be able to receive and immediately forward these reports of sexual abuse to correctional agency officials, allowing the person who is incarcerated and making the report to remain anonymous upon request. PREA Standard 115.53 requires correctional facilities to provide individuals who are incarcerated with access to outside victim advocates for emotional support services related to sexual abuse. This standard requires facilities to give incarcerated people mailing addresses and telephone numbers, including toll-free numbers where available, of local, state, or national victim advocacy or rape crisis organizations. PREA Standard 115.53 also mandates that correctional agencies maintain or attempt to enter into memoranda of understanding or other agreements with community service providers that are able to provide those who are incarcerated with confidential emotional support services related to sexual abuse. Since the Department of Justice released the PREA standards in 2012, and as Marnie alluded to, many confinement agencies and facilities across the country, including those in remote and rural areas, have encountered significant challenges achieving and maintaining compliance with standards 115.51 and 115.53. Such agencies and facilities report that needed victim support services are often scarce or non-existent and are typically under-resourced. In addition, organizations that provide such services may be hesitant, for a host of reasons that are understandable, to partner with correctional agencies and facilities. It can also be particularly challenging for correctional agencies and facilities to identify a separate entity or office that has the capacity to receive and immediately forward reports of sexual abuse from those who are incarcerated to correctional agency officials while allowing those who report to remain anonymous upon request. So, in sum, this important initiative is intended to explore and determine how a national service line for incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse can most effectively address the needs of these survivors, and if and how such a service line can support the efforts of confinement facilities and agencies to achieve and maintain compliance with PREA standards 115.51 and or 115.53. Then, in a future fiscal year, and if there is sufficient PREA funding available, fingers crossed about that, it is BJA's and OVW's sincerest hope that the important work conducted under this initiative and the comprehensive plan that Marnie mentioned that's developed as a result will be used to guide the implementation of a national service line for incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse that's very effective in addressing the needs of these survivors and in assisting agencies and facilities in achieving and maintaining compliance with one or both of the PREA standards that I just explained and that are listed on the slide. Before I pass the baton to our OVW friends and colleagues to talk about the specific requirements of the solicitation and the application process, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that another one of the primary reasons why I'm so excited about this initiative and the collaborative partnership between OVW and BJA is the quality of the people who work at OVW and BJA who will be primarily involved in helping to lead this important work. From OVW, they include Marnie Shields, Melissa Shimasek, and Lucy Moran. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to work on this initiative with Marnie, Melissa, and Lucy, and their involvement and leadership will help to ensure that this program is very successful and benefits those seeking to achieve and maintain compliance with the PREA standards, and more importantly, provides vitally important services and support to incarcerated victims of sexual abuse. Marnie and her colleagues at OVW have been talking with us in the PREA Management Office at BJA about the possibility of a national service line for incarcerated victims of sexual abuse for a very long time now, and we are just delighted to finally begin to bring Marnie's and OVW's great ideas to life through this unique and important initiative. From BJA's PREA Management Office, I'm delighted that my dear friend and colleague, Emily Chande, will play a key role in this initiative. Working with Marnie, Melissa, and Lucy, Emily will ensure that this program maximizes its great potential to impact the field and provide services and support to some of our society's most vulnerable people. Emily is one of this country's 2 or 3 most knowledgeable subject matter experts on the PREA standards, their implications for agencies and facilities, strategies to achieve and maintain compliance with them, and auditing compliance with them. So in summary, and from my point of view, there are 2 incredibly compelling reasons to be interested in and excited about this initiative and to strongly consider submitting an application to OVW to be involved in it. The first is to carry out work that will have a very substantial and positive impact on, most significantly, incarcerated victims of sexual abuse, as well as those working diligently in jurisdictions across the country to achieve and maintain compliance with the PREA standards. The second reason is to work closely with awesome and expert colleagues from OVW and BJA's PREA Management Office who are steadfastly committed to the success of this initiative and who will serve as amazing partners to and supporters of whomever is selected to carry out the work. Thank you again for participating in this webinar today. I look forward to reviewing many excellent applications. I'll now pass the baton to Lucy, Marnie, and Melissa from OVW to talk about the specifics of the solicitation and what's required of the applicants. Lucy, Marnie, and Melissa, take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom, for explaining the background and the goals of this initiative so clearly and for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Moran, and I support the legal policy team at OVW. I've been helping with the development of this solicitation and currently serve as the point of contact for any and all questions. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm glad so many people could make it. So I am going to spend my part of the webinar walking you through some of the key elements of the solicitation. Because this is a special initiative, there are a number of parts that are unique and kind of unlike other OVW programs. I do want to stress to everyone before moving on just the importance of reading the solicitation in its entirety very closely. This pre-application is really meant to complement the solicitation and give everyone a chance to kind of ask questions in real time, but it shouldn't be used as like a replacement for reading the solicitation. So just to jump right in, as you heard from Tom, this initiative is the result of a partnership between BJ and OVW and is being administered in two phases, a planning phase and an implementation phase. The solicitation we posted is accepting applicants for the first phase. So we are going to fund one organization in the amount of $600,000 for a period of 24 months to conduct kind of a national scan of practices related to efforts to comply with the two PREA standards and come up with a plan to implement a national service line based on guidance from subject matter experts. The implementation phase that follows, depending on the availability of funding, will focus on using whatever is developed in the first phase to implement the service line. One thing I want to make sure to take the time to note is that the organization funded under the first planning phase will not be eligible to receive funding to implement the plan under phase 2. So the award is also being funded as a cooperative agreement, and I just want to spend a quick second talking about what that means, because cooperative agreements are a type of award where OVW will have substantial involvement throughout the course of the project. So this may mean participating in meetings, teleconferences, webinars, and reviewing all materials and that kind of thing. And also you'll hear a little bit more about this later, but there are a number of deliverables that OVW is expecting applicants to produce, but because this is a cooperative agreement, all applicants should be receptive to the possibility that deliverables and activities may change. So the next topic I wanted to cover is who is eligible to apply and receive funding for this initiative. There are 3 different eligible organization types: nonprofits, institutions of higher education, and victim service providers. But in addition to being one of the 3 types of eligible organizations, there are also a few different skill sets that we are asking applicants to have for this initiative in order to be successful. So I have put them up on the screen, and it can be found on page 8 of the solicitation. But we are requiring that eligible applicants have a history of managing large-scale projects. So that might be other grants or cooperative agreements, have experience providing training and technical assistance, have the ability to coordinate diverse people and perspectives, and also have experience synthesizing and applying research on gender-based violence. And these skill sets are really what we consider as kind of necessary prerequisites for a successful project, which is in and of itself focused on synthesizing what's already out there, collaborating with individuals, and producing kind of tangible recommendations and a structure for the service line. So while we are asking the lead applicants to have these certain required skill sets, we understand that this project also relies on a wide range of subject matter expertise. So rather than requiring the lead applicants to have all of the required skills and also be experts on every topic that the initiative covers, we are allowing applicants to fill in that subject matter expertise through partnerships. So as part of the project, we're requiring that the lead applicant establish at least one formal partner and form a steering committee comprised of individuals or organizations representing diverse perspectives. And we'll get into the difference between the two, the formal partners and the steering committee members, a little bit later, so I won't go into that now. But I am just going to put up a list here of the subject matters that we expect to have coverage of throughout the course of the presentation, which can also be found on page 9 of the solicitation. So we are requiring that formal partners and or steering committee members demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the PREA standards, knowledge of correctional operations and facility types, expertise in and knowledge of the dynamics of sexual abuse and sexual harassment in confinement, experience in providing and developing victim services, experience in providing victim services to underserved and diverse populations, experience in providing PA on services for victims of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, and also direct experience working with those who have been or currently are incarcerated. So realistically, you may be looking at this list and thinking that this is a lot of subject matters required to be covered by the initiative, which is true. But we also want to emphasize that these topics aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So you may decide to include a victim service provider that has extensive experience developing victim services while also serving a diverse population or geographical area. On the other hand, you may decide to include an organization that has overlapping expertise with the areas listed here. Both are entirely permissible. We just we really just want to make sure that the experts or individuals with experience in different fields have the opportunity and the space to incorporate their perspectives into the project. So lead applicants are also allowed to determine how the subject matter expertise is represented, so whether or not an organization is going to be a formal partner or a steering committee member, and should just plan to indicate this in the project narrative. I also want to make a quick note that the subject matter areas on the screen, you're not limited to the subject matter areas on the screen here. Applicants are definitely encouraged to include other subject matter experts in their project, however they deem appropriate. In fact, we would recommend applicants involve formerly incarcerated individuals who have experienced sexual abuse and harassment in confinement settings, because they bring lived experiences and really important perspectives that are undoubtedly valuable to inform recommendations that come out of the planning phase. And this isn't a requirement, but just something that we want you to all keep in mind while you're working on your application and developing or solidifying your partnership. So this slide is just kind of a visual representation of what we've been talking about, the different eligibility requirements, and it's just kind of how we want you to think about it. So again, the lead applicant has to have certain skill sets, which includes that research capacity and so forth. But the partners and the steering committee members should be filling in that subject matter expertise required at the project. Of course, if you are a lead applicant and with the required skill sets, and on top of that, you have some of the subject matter expertise, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure to note, it in your project narrative, because we really just want to make sure there's coverage of all the topics that we see are essential to the project. So switching gears a little bit here, I now want to spend some time going through the actual application contents. So up on the screen is just a list of all the documents that are required for a complete application. Just so you know, I pulled this list from the checklist on page 22 of the solicitation, and I highly encourage everyone to use this as you're completing your application, because it's very important to include all these various components. But for the purposes of this webinar, I'm just going to highlight and spend time talking about the contents of the application that are unique to this initiative. So really, that's just the project narrative, the letters of support, and the budget worksheet and budget narrative, which also happen to be the only scored elements of the application. So first is the project narrative is kind of where the bulk of your points are coming from. It's 65 points in total, and the applicants are limited to 25 pages double spaced. The project narrative is composed of two sections: the capacity to implement the project and the what will be done. And this is really your opportunity to demonstrate your ability to complete this project and lay out a tentative plan for doing so. So of the two sections, the capacity to implement the project is 40 points in total, which makes it the section that's worth the most overall. And this is because the nature of this planning grant is that we're relying on the lead applicant and their project partners to develop an actionable blueprint or model based on research and various expertise that can be used and followed in the implementation phase. So we want to hear about how you and your project partners have the skills, experience, and expertise to actually make this happen. And this is really where we want you to focus on your and your project partner's existing abilities. So up on the screen here is just kind of a shortened version of what's on page 11 of the solicitation, and describes exactly what we are looking for in the capacity section. But basically, this is where the applicant should demonstrate that they meet the eligibility requirements that we were just talking about. So the lead applicant should describe here how they possess the required skill sets. Remember, that's the training and technical assistance capacity, research capacity, et cetera, and how their formal partners and steering committee members meet the wide range of subject matter expertise, like the PREA, understanding of the PREA standards, sexual assault dynamics, and so forth. In this section, we also want applicants to identify who exactly at an organization will be participating in the project and their own specific qualifications. And finally, we want applicants to describe their capacity to use technology as a vehicle to implement project activities. So this is a collaborative project by nature, and you'll likely have a number of virtual events and meetings. And while I like to think that all of us have probably gotten a lot more comfortable with those over the past year and a half. We are looking for applicants to describe here how they have the ability and the resources to facilitate those conversations. And one quick note on the capacity section is that we know it might not be possible to formalize all of your partnerships by the time you're submitting your application. So if there is an organization you're hoping to work with, mention this and your plan to include them in your narrative, and we'll take it into consideration. Okay, so the second part of the project narrative is the what will be done section, which is 25 points in total. And this section describes the applicant's actual plan for exploring how and whether a service line could assist confinement agencies and facilities comply with the two PREA standards, as well as ensure quality services for survivors. So I've put up on the screen what exactly we're looking for in this section, which is also on page 11 of the solicitation. So first, we're looking for applicants to describe how they plan to assess existing services in confinement facilities across the country, as well as how confinement facilities are complying with or not complying with the PREA standards. We heard from Tom that a lot of facilities with limited resources or that are geographically isolated have been struggling to comply. And so this is the applicant's opportunity to talk about how they'll look into this as well. Number two, applicants should plan to include a discussion of how they will investigate and distinguish between the two PREA standards. So once again, as Tom covered, the PREA standards focus on reporting and access to victim services, which are linked, but there are certain concerns like confidentiality, release of information, and other things that may make it challenging for a single service line to address both requirements. So this is kind of why we're looking for applicants to include plans for an investigation into the distinction between the two requirements and whether a national service line can be responsive to both requirements. I also just want to take a quick second to say here that the actual number 2 on the list was dropped in the solicitation production process in Just Grants. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Just Grants and all of its little quirks. So if you look in the solicitation, it jumps from 1 to 3, but rest assured that number 2 here is a separate and distinct requirement of this section, and we will be looking for it to be addressed. Number 3, we want to hear about how applicants plan on gathering information, how the information will be used. And then finally, we want applicants to include information on what specific tools you will use to gather information from subject matter experts and from previously or currently incarcerated individuals. So this is where your steering committee might come into play with roundtables, information sharing sessions, et cetera. Or this might be where you as an applicant will include plans to conduct a literature review, so those kinds of things. So applicants should also plan here to present a timeline of things like the major objectives and tasks and also the responsible parties. And then my final comment for the what will be done section is just that applicants should keep an eye on the out-of-scope activities when they're thinking about this section. The out-of-scope activities can be found on page 7 of the solicitation and include research projects and also any activities that are not directly related to the planning process. So no one should include plans here about administering direct victim services or engaging in outreach or prevention activities and so forth. Okay, so as I've been sort of mentioning throughout the course of this presentation, applicants are required to establish at least one formal partner as well as a steering committee to help account for the wide range of subject matter expertise. So I'm finally going to explain the difference here between the two, and I've put together this diagram to help visualize it. So first, a formal partner should expect to have a more significant role in the project, which may include directly carrying out the goals, objectives, and/or deliverables of the lead applicant. And in addition, the formal partner will work with not only the lead applicant, but also OVW to formalize a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, as one of the project's deliverables. So this MOU will clearly define the roles of the organization and any conflict of interest concerns. So as I mentioned earlier, the lead applicants are not eligible to receive funding to implement the project under phase 2. It is possible, depending on the level of involvement from a formal partner, that they will also be conflicted out of receiving funding under phase 2, but that will be accounted for in that Memorandum of Understanding. I also just want to take a second to make sure to make it clear that the MOU is not part of the application materials that applicants have to have ready and final. That'll be something we'll work on together. So on the other hand, the steering committee members will not be participating in the day-to-day operations of the project. So it's up to the applicant, but steering committee members may instead provide recommendations to the applicant, participate in focus groups, review materials, help connect the lead applicant with other resources and individuals and that kind of thing. And another contrast between steering members is that they will be eligible to apply for phase 2 funding if they qualify as an eligible entity. We're not expecting that their involvement will reach the level to bring any conflict of interest concerns. So with these differences in mind, the thing that both types of partnerships have in common is the fact that they are required to submit letters of support as part of the application. So now I'm just going to get into kind of the content of the letters of support. So the letters make up 20 points in total and should be signed by an organization's authorized representative. Individuals are also permitted to serve on the steering committee and don't necessarily have to be associated with an organization. And so if that is the case, then individuals can just submit letters on their own behalf. But regarding the content of what we're hoping to see in the letters, I've included a list here, which can be found on page 15 of the solicitation. And we are looking for a description of any resources the partner steering committee members will contribute to the project, an identification of key staff, description of the roles and responsibilities they're planning to assume, a description of the organization's subject matter expertise, specifically to ensure that we're covering all of those subject matter areas, and a specific statement as to whether the organization or individual will be serving in that formal partner role or as a steering committee member. So the last application document that I'm going to talk about today is the budget. So the budget is worth 15 points and should not exceed $600,000. Also, another note is that applicants will have to complete the web-based form, specifically in Just Grants, for the budget worksheet and budget narrative. So all the other documents I've been talking about and most of the other application documents as a whole will just be uploaded into Just Grants, either as a PDF or a Word document. But the budget, they'll actually complete the web-based form. So I put up on the screen here what should be included in the budget, which can be found on page 12 of the solicitation. But the important takeaway here is that everything in the rest of the application should be supported here in the budget, including all the items discussed in the project narrative, things like compensation for individuals participating in the planning activities and any project partners for their full level of effort, and et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing I want to point out about the budget is that it's important you speak with people with either direct incarceration experience or expertise, and that should also be representative of those who are incarcerated. So as a result, it's really important that you include language access or communication access needs, or you incorporate those needs into your budget to accommodate people with limited English proficiency. So I have put a few resources that our Grants Financial Management, or GFMD, unit at OVW has created or made accessible on our website to help you in developing your budget. The first is a link to a webinar that GFMD put together that's all about creating a budget and specifically what they look for when they're reviewing a budget. Another is a sample budget, also on our website. And then the last two are just links to the DOJ Financial Guide and the Solicitation Companion Guide, which I recommend you look at and read through. They're really good tools. We know that kind of creating a budget can be daunting and there's a lot of information to sift through. So we've also included the email for the GFMD team at the end of this presentation for any questions that you have that comes up about the budget. So that kind of wraps up what I'm going to cover specifically about the solicitation and the application documents, but I just want to quickly go over the project deliverables. So in the solicitation, these are listed on page 6 under program scope. And here you should see a list of 8 anticipated project deliverables. The first 2, which are the ones that are up on your screen here, are the ones that really focus on that kind of collaborative part of the project, so bringing people together. See, the first one is all about the establishment of the steering committee. The second one is about that memorandum of understanding that's going to be developed as a deliverable. And then the next 6, which are up on the screen now, focus on what we are expecting the lead applicant to incorporate and sort of produce during the project. So I'm not going to go through them here, but I do encourage people to read this section of the solicitation closely and kind of weave the elements and understandings that these are the expectations into your application. So just remember that we've identified a problem, and there are challenges in complying with the PREA standards, resulting in insufficient services for incarcerated survivors and limited reporting options. So our best thinking is that a service line, a national service line, could address these challenges, and we're looking for the funded organization to tell us how to get there. We want you to do the groundwork here. We want you to bring in the research in the areas of expertise and put together a report that we can then pick up and use as a model for implementing the project later. And that's really what we're trying to get at and convey with these deliverables here. And the last thing I'll note about the deliverables is just a reminder that they may change. This is a planning grant, so it's entirely possible that the activities and the deliverables might need adjustment as we sort of learn and take in new information. Once again, applicants should just be ready to work with OVW and BJA and be receptive to modifying the activities to meet the goals of the initiative. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Melissa Schmiezik to talk about the new 2-step application process.
Thank you, Lucy. Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Schmiezik. I'm a program manager and team lead at OVW, and I'm working on this project with Lucy and Marnie and the BJA team, Tom and Emily. So Lucy, if you could just advance the slide real quick. And I just want to take a little moment to emphasize and highlight the 2-step application process, as we're calling it at OVW, with the systems. So the first step, and you'll notice the corresponding deadlines here. The first step is to complete 2 forms, the SF424 and the SFLLL. Both of these forms are completed and submitted through grants.gov, and that deadline is August 25th. You must complete this deadline step before Just Grants will allow you to even begin the submission process in the Just Grants system. The Just Grants system is where you then will submit your full application. And all those items that Lucy talked about, the capacity to implement, what will be done, a couple other forms, those all will be submitted in Just Grants. And that is the final due date of September 1st. If you miss the grants.gov deadline on August 25th, you will not be able to submit or start an application in Just Grants, and you will then miss that deadline. So it's imperative that you mark your calendars, make sure you make that August 25th deadline, so then you can continue on, get your documents ready for the application, and be able to submit by the September 1st deadline in Just Grants. We encourage people to complete these phases a couple days ahead of time, if at all possible. For sure, the Just Grants, you should deadline, you should be starting that and getting that submitted at least 48 hours ahead of time to allow yourself some time in case you encounter any technical difficulties. Which brings me to the next slide. If you encounter any technical problems with either grants.gov or with Just Grants, please refer to page 19 in the solicitation. It outlines very explicit steps of what you must do if you do encounter those issues, who to contact, both in terms of technical assistance with that issue and who you should contact in OVW to inform us of your problems ahead of time. It's imperative that you follow these steps. If there is any possibility of us accepting an application past the deadline, you must be able to have shown that you followed these steps and have documentation to support that you did. So those are very important steps. Make sure you flag those for yourself. Make sure you mark those deadlines and hit those deadlines on time. I'll turn it back to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So I've just sort of put on, I think we're going to just open it up for questions now, but I have put up a slide here just for the various kind of contacts that you can reach out to for any sort of questions that come up. So please feel free to reach out to me for any programmatic questions, if you have specific financial questions, GFMD, and then those technical questions. So the grants.gov applicant support and the Just Grants support. It's really important here, actually, and I do want to highlight it, is that if you have any technical issues or questions with Just Grants, to please contact the OVW Just Grants support, just because I think they're a little bit less overburdened, so they can hopefully help you a little bit quicker. So, and that's the email that we have throughout the solicitation, but just want to make sure to note that here. So anyway, happy to open it up for questions. Feel free to type them into the Q&A section. And Melissa, I don't know if we've gotten any so far.
We did get one question earlier on, which we answered, but I'm just going to take this moment to read the question. So it was, I have two related questions. Does participation as a partner on an application automatically conflict you from applying and in phase 2? And does being on the steering committee conflict you in the implementation phase? So just maybe, Marnie, if you want to take a moment to just re-emphasize the response, which Lucy did address, but if you could just address that again here, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So for the advisory/steering committee members, it definitely does not conflict you out of any future involvement because the role is more in an advisory capacity. For the MOU partners, it will depend on the exact role of the partner. And the hope is that we will structure it in a way so that it does not create a conflict, but we can't guarantee that until we see exactly what the relationship is and what the role is and so forth. The idea behind having the conflict is that we as a government can't have a situation where somebody's basically designing it for themselves. So if you come back and give us something that says, oh, here would be the perfect service line, and it just happens that the perfect service line you describe is exactly a perfect fit for your organization, you know, that's a problem for us. So that is the reason for that conflict. So you can't set it up for yourself to be the ultimate recipient if we have the funding for the implementation.
Thank you, Marnie. That is, okay, so sorry, I'm not seeing all the questions. I have to kind of scroll a bit. So we do have another question. I'm just going to read it out loud. It seems clear that for-profit organizations cannot be the lead organization on bids, but can for-profit organization be bid as a partner or as part of the steering committee?
Yes, they can, and they could also be individuals in those roles as a partner, whether it's on the steering committee or the MOU partners.
Great, thank you, Marnie. Those are all the questions so far. So again, I would just reiterate, type your question in the Q&A portion. I'll read it out loud and you'll get a verbal answer so we can capture that in the recording for future use as well. as people kind of maybe think or type, I wanted to, I know Lucy talked about if you have technical issues with the Just Grants submission process or accessing Just Grants, to make sure that you contact the ovw.justgrantsupport@usdoj.gov address. It may be that when you're in the Just Grant system, it provides a number and email, and that's the default address. So it won't have the OVW in the address. So just please make sure to refer to the solicitation for any contact support information to make sure you're getting to the right place and getting the most direct response possible.
Melissa, there is a question that has come in the chat that I'm going to go ahead and read out loud and answer, and then there's a new question I see in the Q&A.
Go for it.
So the question in the chat is, we are currently a service line at our nonprofit organization for incarcerated individuals that have been sexually assaulted. Would you recommend that we apply for phase 1 as a lead applicant? And I would encourage, if any, both the person who wrote this question and anyone else in that boat, to really look carefully at the list of skills that the lead applicant needs to have, in terms of being able to manage a large scope project and that sort of thing, and determine if you really are a fit for that, or if it would be better to have you as a partner with somebody that has more of that broad scope expertise and experience.
Thank you, Marnie. So the question in the Q&A portion is, just to confirm, it sounds like the lead organization and the proposed partner can work with OVW post-award to negotiate and define the partner organization's role and level of effort, such that the phase 2 on implementing the service line, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The lead applicant is conflicted no matter what, but the partners are not necessarily conflicted. And that's the goal, is to work with you on the MOU to try to make sure that you're not.
Okay. Next question, is it a requirement that members of the partner steering committee be in the same geographical area?
Not at all. Any geographical area is fine. You'll just have to address sort of your plans for how you're going to work together, whether it's going to be phone calls or web calls, or if you're going to have some in-person meetings, and then include, if you are going to have in-person meetings and you're not in the same geographic area, make sure you include travel in the budget.
Very good. Thanks, Marnie. Next question is, as a member of a smaller not-for-profit that meets the rest of the criteria guidelines, would a financial advisor be sufficient as a partner to meet the criteria of overseeing money?
I, again, would encourage you to read carefully the section of the solicitation that talks about the criteria, because it talks about financial capacity as well as sort of organizational capacity. And if you're needing to have that financial partner, I would question whether you have the financial capacity and experience to do a large scale project. So again, I can't speak for whether your organization qualifies, but I encourage you to read that section of the solicitation very carefully.
Thank you once again. Next question is, can current TA providers for OVW programs be included as project partners?
Absolutely.
Scrolling, I've hit the end of questions so far. Don't see any other questions in the chat either. We may have hit the end of our questions from folks. Don't be shy.
And feel free, if you think of things later, to email Lucy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's never, we'd rather have you ask questions than wonder or assume and, you know, not address something. So it's better to ask the questions as soon as you have them. Okay, so we have another question. Would an organization that is involved in PREA audits potentially have a conflict of interest with performing phase 1?
I'm going to let Tom take that, but my thinking would be no, that actually you might have very good information about how facilities are currently meeting these standards based on the experience doing audits. But do you have any thoughts on that, Tom?
Hi, this is Tom. No, Marnie, I totally agree with you that, yeah, there may be, such an entity may have unique insights into these kinds of challenges that we've talked about today, and could speak to those in their application. I also want to give Emily Chande, who I think is on the call, a chance to chime in here if she is. Emily, sorry to put you on the spot, but just want to make sure all of our perspectives are represented in these responses.
If Emily's talking, you might be muted, Emily.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm here. I was talking on mute. Yeah, so sorry, Tom and Marnie, I agree with that. I don't think there would be a conflict with phase 1. I think phase 2, again, if there's, you know, sufficient funding for that, I think an organization in that position may be conflicted out during that phase. But for phase 1, again, no, I don't think so.
And I just wanted, Emily, thank you. And just to underscore the point that I made a little while ago, and that is, you know, we operate our PREA implementation work on a year-by-year basis. There's an annual PREA appropriation, as some of you may know, and so this is phase 1 of this work. And as I mentioned, we have our fingers and toes crossed that there will be money available to carry out phase 2 as we've described, but we obviously can't make any guarantees that that will be the case, but that's our desire and goal. But again, we'll just have to see what the appropriations look like in the future for PREA work.
Thank you both. I do not have any other questions in the Q&A or in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us for the pre-application webinar for the National Service Line for Incarcerated Survivors of Sexual Abuse Initiative, and thank you to our presenters. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please reach out to Lucy. Her email address is on the slides. We will also be sharing the webinar recording and the slides after the presentation when they are available. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining.